How's it going, everybody? MyCupOfTea here, back to a reaction video, and we're here to return to watch some more Warhammer videos. Yay, yay. Now it's time to learn about some more Warhammer characters, or I guess a faction in this case, because today we're going to be watching Space Marine Librarians Are Insane, Faction Deep Dive Warhammer 40K lore. Now I know I watched a video in the past that talked a little bit about the Librarians, like it was part of this whole faction video I think it was, but this time we got a whole video dedicated to the Librarians, which they might be like up there on like the Space Marines tier list, like how strong they are. And this was requested by Raw Mail. Bam! Shouts out to you, Raw Mail. Shouts out to you. Thank you for the request, because I need to get back on my Warhammer video session, my journey, because I've been slacking. I have been slacking. We getting back into it. So no more talking. Let's jump in. Let's hear about the Space Marines and the Librarians. Yeah, okay. Let's learn about Xfinity and how they are iffy with their Wi-Fi stuff. Alright, I turned on some captions, so let's get into this video now.
Within the
in case I talk over what they're saying.
Adeptus Astartes exist a handful of gifted individuals known as Librarians, masters of the psychic arts that stride through the chaos of war untouched by bullet or blade. They march forward, wreathed in a corona of crackling blue energy, as the sheer weight of their psychic presence presses down on all those before them, like a supercell of arcane potential, inspiring their allies and sowing fear into the minds of all those that would threaten his Imperium. They are a nuclear warhead in human form, a hurricane of supernatural fury,
I didn't know they were that strong,
in resplendent cobalt power armor. Each and every Librarian is a warrior mystic, an individual with the remarkable gift to pierce the veil between universes and harness the great ocean's might to bend the laws of nature and manipulate reality itself.
What introduction
this may take
to
the
this
form of summoning storms of
group?
Arcane lightning, manipulating the flow of space and time, or summoning pillars of psychic fire
that
reduce their foes to nothing more than clouds of ash and molten slag. They are the conduits through which destructive energies of the warp can be channeled into real space and funneled against the enemies of mankind. To be a Librarian is to forever walk a perilous path. On one hand, to be blessed with remarkable supernatural abilities,
sounds great,
but to also always be watched with a suspicious eye by those you have sworn your life to defend. It is to forever stand upon the precipice of annihilation. One single mistake, one momentary lapse in judgment. You are always a single step from eternal damnation.
Well, dang,
the Librarians
I can't make a
spend
mistake.
the majority of their time in deep contemplation within the sacred halls of their chapter's librarium, a repository of the vast and secretive lore of their chapter, as well as every insight into the nature of mankind's enemies that has ever been pinned. It is here, behind locked doors warded with pentagrammic symbols, where the Order of Librarians commits themselves to the study and organization of these sacred texts. No matter what form a librarian's duty may take, they must be ever vigilant, forever furthering their discipline and steeling their mind against all temptation, while simultaneously constantly probing the members of their order for the tiniest indication of a wavering resolve. The Librarians will not tolerate the grievous sin of weakness,
I'll talk a little bit later.
for theirs is a role too important to fail. They have been blessed with power.
Not right now, before I forget. So I know there's different factions in the Space Marines, like they have like different chapters. You know, you got the Salamanders, I forgot the ones like stealthy, basically Marines. So each of these like factions, I think I'm calling it right, has their own like I guess Librarian variation. I'm assuming because I saw like different pictures. I saw like the I'm calling them the Vikings Space Marines. They had like I think it was a Librarian Viking, I guess you can call it. Okay, interesting. Also, they're like hey. You better not be tempted by the chaos. You better not be tempted by chaos or be corrupted by the evil forces, or else that's your ass. Okay.
Of weakness, for theirs is a role too important to fail. They have been blessed with power beyond mortal comprehension, and with that comes the responsibility of being uncompromisingly ruthless. The galaxy is plagued by the Emperor's myriad foes, countless traitors, Xenos, and heretics. The foulness of the warp suffices many of them with its fell power, which they will attempt to use against us. Thus we don the psychic hood. With its psionic baffles, null circuits, and empiric siphons are we ever shielded from the foul witchery of our enemies. The efficacy of the four swords, staff, and axe demonstrates clearly the power of our wrath. Through them do we channel our fury, our hatred of the foe. Through their crystalline matrices does our strength flow, and with them do we lay low our enemies.
That's a powerful quote.
Let's talk a bit more about the Space Marine Librarians.
Yes, please. That was just an introduction.
That's wild. Heroes of Lithis. Not only does the game look great, but it also has
rock out. I wonder. Well, he's probably gonna explain it, but I wonder how you become a Librarian. obviously you gotta have like a strong mental fortitude so you don't get tempted by the chaos. I forget, it's been so long since I watched like Warhammer, not that long, but I think it's chaos because he mentioned that librarians can tap into that basically that dark void to like use powers. I think he mentioned. Yeah, so you have to have a strong fortitude, a strong mental so you don't get tempted by evil and get tempted by the demons. Also, it's a tough journey to become a space marine, but I wonder how tough it is to become a librarian. Like, you also have to partake in some more like killing people in order to become a librarian, like trials, because just being a regular space marine, billions be dying, millions upon millions be dying to become a space marine. And librarians seem like it's like the head honcho, like one of the like top tiers in like the space marine ranking system. You can't make a single mistake or else you're done. You're done, Zoe. You better be perfect. If you're a librarian, you better be perfect or else. And we're back. Let's get it.
So what exactly is a librarian?
Yes.
Well, to put it as simply as possible, they are the Psykers utilized by the Loyalist Space Marine chapters. Each and every one is a psychic powerhouse that is capable of unleashing wide-scale destruction upon the battlefield by channeling the energies of the warp and directing them against the enemies of mankind. But it's a lot deeper than that. They have a lot more responsibilities than simply acting like a badass space wizard in power armor. They are also the record keepers of a chapter's history and lore, hence where the name librarian comes from. Further, they are also responsible for interstellar psychic communication. Without their and the Astropath's efforts, the Space Marines would not be able to call for aid or deploy where they are needed.
Wow, they're really useful for communication
but
stuff.
One of the most important roles fulfilled by the librarians
what do you say?
does not seem like a big. The Space Marines would not be able to call for aid or deploy where they are needed. It may not seem like a big deal at first.
That's a huge deal.
One of the most important roles
That's a huge deal
by the librarians is the screening of young aspirants that are to be inducted into the chapter for psychic potential. Compared to the masses of humanity, Psykers are relatively rare. But even rarer still is a Psyker that has the potential to master their esoteric gifts. The librarians must be absolutely merciless with the screening process.
Okay, here we go.
To live
I
through a
mentioned this
juvenile
earlier.
Psyker with a weak will is to potentially invoke cataclysmic disaster. This could take the more obvious form of the individual being unable to control their massive reservoir of power, which then in turn leads to a physical disaster that could instantaneously end the lives of everyone aboard the ship.
Oh no.
Or worse, jeopardize a critically important mission at the worst possible moment.
The more so that probably happened in the Warhammer universe.
Space Marines are created with reused gene seed. A weak-willed psychic individual being blessed with one of the samples from the chapter's gene stock could risk permanently mutating and corrupting it, and then in turn after their death, the gene seed would spread through the new recruits, eventually condemning a once powerful and revered band of brothers to just an unfortunate footnote in the Imperium's history. Although psychic aspirants that would go on to become librarians can come from just about any walk of life, one of the most common ways they are recruited is being taken from the Scholastica Psychana. These young men would have most commonly been psychic individuals from across the galaxy that had been gathered up and brought to Terra by the fleet of black ships commonly associated with the Sisters of Silence and other witch hunters. The purpose of these crusades is to cull the Psyker population within the Imperium, as a rogue, unsanctioned Psyker can be incredibly dangerous. Most of those taken by the ships will end up being sacrificed to the Golden Throne, thus contributing their psychic essence to the Emperor, helping him keep the Astronomicon lit and the forces of chaos at bay. Not all of them will suffer this fate,
ever be revived?
as many of the Psykers will be deemed suitable for training, and after entering the Scholastica Psychana may be trained in a variety of different paths, eventually becoming what is known as a sanctioned Psyker. And maybe they will end up as an astropath and contribute to the Imperium's communication efforts, or maybe they will end up in the Imperial Guard in a group of similar psychic individuals that are referred to as Weird Vein Psykers. These are groups comprised of Psykers that, although powerful, will never fully gain enough control to master their abilities single-handedly, and instead act as a unit of Psykers who funnel their abilities together and share the burden of control. Or perhaps the individual will demonstrate incredible aptitude and discipline, thus enabling them to walk the path of the Primaris Psyker. Exceptionally rare individuals that have the willpower and resolve to not only master the psychic arts, but the endurance to bear the considerable burden their responsibilities will demand of them. If the Psyker in question is young enough, male, and possesses both an incredible aptitude for psychic power and a discipline seemingly wrought from steel, then they may be considered to be inducted into the Space Marine chapters as a new librarian. Now, each chapter takes its new...
So, I have to be a male and young enough to be considered, or be like even... Yeah, to even be considered a Space Marine chapter or like a new librarian. He mentioned something else too, but okay. Got it.
who recruits in different ways, and there are instances of chapters discovering individuals with psychic potential within the legion of new aspirants. However they are discovered, if an aspirant is deemed suitable for such a role, they will begin the process of initiation into the Space Marines.
Oh god, what is it?
Not only having to endure the ludicrous trials and tribulations of all of the chapters of Astartes, but simultaneously having to complete the necessary training to becoming a librarian. Now, the attrition rate for Space Marine aspirants is ridiculously high. The numbers vary from chapter to chapter and are not really well defined, but a ballpark figure would see out of thousands of aspirants, maybe 15 making it to the rank of neophyte, and out of those 15, maybe 3 to 6 will become full-fledged Space Marines. Even more so than that ridiculous figure, it is said that with the Librarians, the attrition rate is far higher. These psychic trials will push the aspirant far past their limits, and failure is met with a fate far worse than death, as the malign entities of the warp see the souls of such individuals as a precious prize indeed. Every single psyker that exists has a small link to the warp within their mind, with which they can pull its energies into real space. Every time they utilize their gifts, they are opening themselves directly to the dark forces that dwell there. The recruit must learn to quickly shield themselves from such entities, lest they be open to either their influence, or far worse, demonic possession. There are even tales of psykers who have lost control to the point where their body, mind, and soul are ripped apart in such a horrific fashion that the footprint they held within the physical universe twists and contorts into a warp portal, with which the spawn of the Immaterium can rip their way into our galaxy.
You get turned to a warp portal if you mess up? If you like, that's crazy. Your whole body and soul just turns into a warp portal that just spawns other demon entities from the warp. That's why I ain't never heard something like that before. You turn to a warp portal.
With which the spawn of the Immaterium can rip their way into our galaxy in a full-blown demonic incursion. This danger is so great that even after being inducted into the Space Marines, the Librarian will undergo years of grueling training within their chapter's librarians
it makes sense,
to learn to better shield their minds and souls. Because of the insane attrition rate and the inherent risk of utilizing Psykers in any capacity, many chapters forego using them in their entirety. The Black Templars potentially being the most famous of which, as they see any psychic art utilized by anyone other than the Emperor himself as blasphemous.
Oh, okay.
Although,
Don't you even think about it.
They have begrudgingly made an exception for astropaths and navigators, seeing them as a necessary evil. But the concept of inducting witches into their own ranks and standing beside them as brothers is absolutely unthinkable to the Black Templar. Mastery of psychic powers is something that doesn't come overnight. It is a lifelong discipline. And due to the Astartes' massively extended lifespans over a normal human, if an aspirant manages to become a librarian, he will be blessed with far more time to hone his skills than any of his mortal peers. And thus may achieve ranks of psychic aptitude far greater than any living mortal could ever dream of. And speaking of ranks, let's talk about the different levels of a librarian.
I didn't know there's levels
to this. To save
before that, Nat,
of a dying
I didn't know there was levels into a librarian rank. I thought it was just like librarian, that's like the set. Okay. Also, this is a Warhammer. Oh, I saw this in the Game Awards. Okay. And we're back. If I unmute the audio, there we go.
Although we most commonly call all psychically gifted Space Marines librarians, they actually have their own unique ranking system, each of which having a different name and list of responsibilities. The lowest rank of a librarian is what is known as a lexiconum. Individuals who you can be forgiven for mistaking as just any other Space Marine,
they look like
as they do not wear the librarian's iconic psychic hoods, and for the most part don't have any markings to indicate their status as a librarian, with two small exceptions. The first is that all librarians must wear blue armor, as dictated by the Codex Astartes. The second is that in addition to one shoulder pauldron bearing the heraldry of their chapter, the free pauldron must bear the librarian symbol in its exact form, with accompanying heraldry to denote the librarian's rank. These are most commonly younger librarians that, although have passed their trials to become a Space Marine, have not fully been tested in combat, and may also not have finished their training in their psychic powers. Regardless of this, they have been deemed worthy to enter the ranks of the librarians. In addition to furthering their training, they primarily take on the role of endlessly maintaining, studying, and cataloging the vast record department of the librarian, constantly organizing every line of text ever recorded by their esteemed chapter.
Can't do that. I can't
Given
do that.
enough time,
I won't do that.
A lexiconum will eventually rise in rank to become what is known as a codicier. Both the codicier and the lexiconum fill a similar role and spend most of their time within the librarium. However, it is these individuals who have further mastered their abilities and have many more years of experience under their belt. Although most librarians will eventually reach this rank, this is where advancement ends for the vast majority of them, as it takes a remarkably gifted individual to become what is known as an epistolary. But we'll get to them in a moment. Codicier's psychic abilities have reached a point where they are deemed suitable enough to fulfill a chapter's purpose. And more importantly, they have demonstrated enough control over those abilities to be useful on the battlefield. The librarians that continue to defy their limitations and advance their gifts far beyond the already remarkable levels of a codicier will become an epistolary. They are potent battle psychers that are given the grim responsibility of engaging with the most dangerous entities known to mankind. They have the incredibly useful ability to send and receive psychic messages at will, and as a veteran psyker, are able to unleash some truly awe-inspiring examples of psychic devastation. However, most importantly, they are given the secondary job of assisting in the Department of Psychic Communication for their chapter's fleet. Because of this, they serve as a strategic command center, and whether they be providing vital intelligence to their brothers during assaults, directing their fleets, coordinating mass planet drops, or just about anything else you can think of in the Department of Wartime Communication. The epistolary is the first of the 3 ranks we have talked about thus far that are permitted to wear the iconic psychic hood commonly associated with librarians.
Okay. So, the Epistolarian is like, that's the main goal, or I don't know if they want to be that, but that's the highest goal for a librarian, or the highest rank for a librarian. Which basically means, like, you're goated at your craft. Like, alright, yeah, he knows what he's doing. This guy knows what he's doing. Let him be in charge of communication, not in charge, but be part of communications. Let him do all the crazy magic. Let him fight the dangerous of dangerous foes out there. Probably fighting with Chaos Gods. Yeah, fighting with Chaos Gods. Maybe you are, I don't know.
Further than that are permitted to wear the iconic psychic hood.
Okay, librarians, I didn't know you guys are that strong.
Further than that, they are granted the prestigious honor of carrying a force weapon into battle. But we'll get into the librarians' iconic equipment later in this video. The epistolaries are some of the strongest psychers within the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. And whenever you see artwork of a librarian, these are the guys it is normally depicting, unless it's a very specific named character. Well, speaking of which, there is one rank higher than the epistolary.
Never mind, I was wrong.
Legendary renown that only a handful out of millions will ever achieve the rank of. I speak, of course, of the Chief Librarians, the arcane masters that all other librarians report.
What do they do?
The Chief Librarians are, without question, the most powerful psychers mankind has ever created. With the exception of beings like the Emperor, Malkador the Sigillite, or psyker primarchs like Magnus the Red. Even amongst the rank of the most veteran psychers, very few even remotely come close to reaching the apex of their potential. A feat demanded by achieving such a prestigious position. Not only are they the undisputed master of the Librarius, but they are also revered as demigods of psychic might. An individual that, although rarely takes to the battlefield themselves, when deployed, will bring about a cataclysmic end to any foe that stands in the chapter's way.
They're the trump card. Everybody's like, alright, we don't want to get our hands dirty, but if we need to, we getting stuff done. Stuff is going to be done here. We don't need anybody's help. We are finishing this. Okay. The trump card, it sounded like,
will bring about a cataclysmic end to any foe that stands in the chapter's way. They can summon raging infernos that can reduce entire armies to flowing rivers of molten armor and flesh, call down raging tempests of arcane lightning, manipulate time itself, and all manner of other seemingly godlike demonstrations of psychic power. This is an excerpt from the Devastation of Baal, wherein Mephiston, Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, gives us just a glimpse into his ridiculous abilities. For context, this is during High Fleet Leviathan's invasion of Baal, and the ship carrying Mephiston is under attack by a flying swarm of Tyranids.
I shall return in a few moments, brothers,
said Mephiston. There were warriors from other chapters within the Thunderhawk who had never seen Mephiston in action. Oraculus grinned at their reaction as Mephiston unlocked his boots from the floor and strode towards oblivion. Empiric energy coursed through the transport hold, Mephiston its focus. With a crackling snap, wings of ruby energy unfurled from his back, and Mephiston leapt into the air without breaking his stride, drawing the sword Vitorus as he took flight.
He really will return in a few moments,
said Raculus. He focused his attention once more on the feed from the Thunderhawk's external sensors. Propelled by the limitless power of the warp, Mephiston streaked past the gunships. A storm of red energy built in front of him, trailing streamers of gases chilled out of the atmosphere. The Lord of Death held out Vitorus before him, his ethereal wings beating with firm, steady strokes, out of time with the great speed he was traveling. A wordless, psychic shout roared from Mephiston's powerful mind, and the storm around him expanded into a broad globe, shaking the Thunderhawks. Writhing energy passed through their airframes and sparked from the Psykers' armor within. The Lord of Death's power concerned
Okay.
Raculus.
Okay.
And he spent his quiet hours wondering if the being he called a master and a friend truly was on the side of
He's
the
like, wait a
angels.
minute, I
The
didn't expect
storm
this.
stabilized, making a barrier around the Thunderhawks. It flickered with eruptions of pink and red lightning and grew fiercer as the aerial swarm approached. The Tyranids would attempt to slow or stop them if they could not destroy the Thunderhawks outright, until the pursuing swarms caught them up and the heavier, slower flying beast could be brought into play. Then the Librarians would be finished. Such a tactic had probably worked a million times on a million devoured worlds in the past, but there was only one Mephiston, and the hive mind had yet to experience the full potency of his wrath.
Alrighty.
Raculus let his empirical senses brush Mephiston's mind briefly, for to push deeper invited death at the Chief Librarian's own hand. The chill, cold fury of Mephiston's rage outmatched the hunger of the hive mind.
Ooh.
Raculus even thought that it could dull the light of the Astronomicon itself.
I don't know what that
The
is, but that
warp
sounds insane, the
heaved around it.
Astronomicon.
The hive mind's vastness had calmed it to doldrums, but Mephiston stirred it into a psychic hurricane. The Tyranids shrieked as they neared their prey, weapon symbiotes extending from aerodynamic housings. Claws flexed in anticipation of the kill. Maws glowed with building bioplasmic generation. Into the swarm the globe of energy went. The skies flashed for 100 miles around with unnatural auras. The Tyranids disappeared as Mephiston's wrath consumed them. Most of those present knew this ability as the Blood Lance, but
Blood Lance, that
none of them
sounds
could
dope.
wield it like Mephiston did. A tremendous electric roar shook the craft as the storm bored a hole right through the Tyranid swarm. Greasy ash thumped against the ships, and the Librarians moaned as they fought to keep hold of their souls, while immersed in the ambit of Mephiston's overwhelming power. The Thunderhawk bucked, and they were through. On the ship's view,
I need to see this
Raculus
animated,
saw
if that's
clear
even
sky
possible.
ahead. The storm winked out, and Mephiston turned back towards the ship. Now, full disclosure, right after the
Hey, hold on, let me. That was a lot. That was a lot. So I'm assuming what happened was he just wiped out the entire Tyranids. He's wiped them out and just went back to the ship like, all right, all in a day's work.
doubt, and Mephiston turned back towards the ship. Now, full disclosure, right after this event happened, Mephiston was basically completely drained of his power. The narrator says that all Psykers have limits, and he had certainly reached his.
Okay.
But even still, it's frightening to think of just the sheer overwhelming levels of power a Space Marine Librarian can eventually achieve.
Oh, man, okay. So some of that might have went over my head. I was trying to imagine it, but he sounds broken. That sounds like a broken thing he just did. Clearly, he wiped all the Tyranids out the way, and they just proceeded on with their ship. Okay. So that's what happens when I forgot the Chief Librarians goes into action. They get stuff done and they carry on. But they do have a limit in their abilities. Damn, we're back.
Just the sheer overwhelming levels of power a Space Marine Librarian can eventually achieve. And speaking of psychic powers, the abilities utilized by psychic individuals are incredibly vast and seem to be limited only by the individual's imagination or specific skill level. Regardless of the Psyker's background, or in some cases even species, just about every psychic power that has ever been documented can trace its origin in at least some regards back to one of 5 major categories, that being biomancy, the art of sculpting and or manipulating flesh to conform to one's will. Divination, the art of gaining sculpting and or manipulating flesh to conform to one's will. Divination, the art of gaining glimpses into the past, present, and future. Pyromancy, the art of manipulating heat and flame. Telekinesis, the ability to translate thought into physical force. And telepathy, the ability to read and control minds, as well as project thoughts at great distance. These groupings of powers can then be further categorized into what are referred to as disciplines. The most common of which amongst the librarians are the Librarius discipline, which pulls information and closely guarded secrets from the chapter's most sacred texts in order to generate their abilities. Some examples of these powers include the Veil of Time, wherein the librarian projects his will on the passage of time, taking in each and every strand of fate and understanding to determine future events before they come to pass.
Okay,
Or the
sure,
Throne of
alright.
the Ancients, wherein the librarian calls
Doctor
upon the
Strange.
myths and legends of his chapter's homeworld in order to conjure a monstrous avatar wrought from psychic energy.
Oh, they can
Another
summon
commonly
avatar.
utilized discipline of the librarians
alright.
is that of technomancy, wherein the librarian is able to affect machine spirits and bend them to his will. The powers include the blessing of the machine, wherein a dormant machine spirit is coaxed into vital life through the librarian's mental impulse, rousing it from its slumber and unleashing the machine it is attached to onto the battlefield. Or Reforge, wherein the librarian communes with the machine spirit in order to soothe its pain and mend any wounds the machine may have obtained. There is also the Fulmination discipline.
I feel like the Adeptus Mechanicus would love that, heal the pain of the machine, because they're all about machine. I'm sorry. I feel like the Adeptus Mechanicus would love that they're doing. They're healing the machines, repairing the machines.
And
I think maybe they would. I don't know how they feel about this.
There is also the Fulmination discipline that centers around the conjuration of arcane lightning, derived from the warp to obliterate the Librarian's foes. This can be used both defensively and offensively. On the attack side is an ability known as Lightning Arc, wherein bolts of warp lightning leap from the Librarian's eyes and mouth before violently arcing in an electrically charged tide through the enemy ranks.
Okay, all right.
On the defensive side, there are abilities such as the Conjuring of Electrical Shields, whose energy can be used to protect the Librarian and his allies against melee attacks, and even ward away bullets by manipulating their trajectory. More advanced uses of this discipline can take the form of electrical displacement, wherein the Librarian bends the powers of the warp through an eldritch bolt of lightning, and is able to travel upon it, flashing across the battlefield instantaneously. Finally, there is the Geokinesis discipline that allows a trained Librarian to manipulate the very earth beneath his feet. Powers include Landquake, where the Librarian stamps down upon the ground and triggers a violent shockwave that ripples forward, knocking enemies off their feet. There is also the power known as Warpquake that sees him focus on a building or fortification before balling his hands tightly into a fist. His hands will begin to shudder violently with etheric energy, and as they do, so too will the building until it crumbles.
That's cold. I want to see that. That sounds cold. I want that one.
Over time, established their own disciplines that better reflect the essence and teachings of the chapter. The Sanguine discipline of the Blood Angels, for example, features such abilities as Boiled Blood, wherein the Librarian causes his enemy's blood to boil into seething frenzy, superheating and causing it to burst from their eyes.
Dangerous.
Or the dreaded Blood Lance, where the user conjures a psychic lance glistening with gore that upon his command
glistening with gore is crazy,
skewering all of the enemies in his path. In interest of not adding too much time to this video, I'm not going to go over every single power utilized by the various
I would have been down for that.
But I will tell you my personal favorite. It comes from the Space Marine chapter known as the Carcharodons, a chapter that is also lovingly referred to as the Space Sharks. They have some pretty interesting powers that call upon the oceans of their long-forgotten homeworld. The first is called From the Depths, and it allows a Carcharodon Librarian to cloud the mind of his adversaries with a suffocating mental darkness.
Oh god.
They will then be bombarded with mental imageries of the watery depths, numbing cold, and visions of massive
ocean deep sea attack.
The terrifying sensations amplify their fear and leave them paralyzed, rendering them completely defenseless against the incoming tide of space sharks. They also have a power known as the Rending Maw, where the Librarian calls forth the avatar of a massive predator from the deep oceans. It erupts from the ground beneath his enemies, the stone and dirt reforming into the shapes of jagged teeth that snap shut, consuming everything in a shower of viscera and gore, before dragging everything in the area of effect back down beneath the ground.
Oh heavens no, if I see that on the battlefield, I'm running. If I can, I'm out of here, I quit. Shoot me if you want to. I'm not fighting, I'm not getting eaten by that. Shoot me in the back if you want to. I ain't doing it. If I see something like that, I'm like, oh man, fight. What is that? I'm back, I'm out. I'm not dealing with this.
Before we get a little bit deeper, I think it's probably important to make a distinction between a Psyker and a Sorcerer.
Oh, please
as
do,
when you
I
look
was
over on
actually
the
kind of
Chaos
confused
side,
about
their
that.
equivalent of Librarians are known as Sorcerers. This admittedly is a distinction that is as important as it is frustratingly vague at times.
Okay.
But I'll do my best to put it in perspective. Now, each of these individuals is pulling their power from the warp, but they do so in different ways. A Psyker, or in the context of this video, a Librarian, is a person whose power comes from years of study and discipline, constantly honing their abilities little by little to achieve incredible results. A Sorcerer is somebody that, although may practice in a similar way, can take a shortcut to even greater powers by making deals with the entities that dwell within the warp. Payment for power can come in the form of some form of pact, a ritualistic sacrifice, or any of the other things you can imagine a bartering demon would ask for. Sorcery, in simple terms, has much greater potential for destructive power, but it's also chaotic and unpredictable.
So, Librarians, you're training, honing your skill, honing your craft for years on end. Sorcerers, you could do that, or you could just make a pact with one of the entities, do a shortcut, or sacrifice somebody, or do some sacrifices to gain more power. Gotcha. Okay, we're goody.
To take these shortcuts is not only to open oneself fully to corruption, but it is to wield abilities oftentimes too powerful to be controlled properly. The Psyker spends a decade learning how to levitate a pebble successfully, with very little risk of suffering the perils of the warp. The Sorcerer enters into an agreement with a demon and thus can lift a boulder with maybe a week or less of practice. But they give up a portion of their soul each and every time they do it.
No.
And considering the fickle nature of the ruinous powers, when they go to do so, it's very likely they might accidentally turn themselves into a gibbering chaos spawn instead. This is admittedly a pretty simple analogy and is not exactly perfect, but this is also an area of the lore that isn't really spelled out for us.
Okay.
So hopefully that kind of puts things in a bit more perspective.
Okay, I get it.
Okay,
The
so
differences.
with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the Librarian Center of Operation, the Librarius or Librarium.
I heard of
depending
that
on who
before.
you ask.
Yeah.
It is the place where all of the knowledge the chapter has ever gained and every insight into its history is stored. These are incredibly secretive places where very few, even amongst the members within the chapter itself, are ever granted access to.
Oh, dang.
This is a place where ancient tomes, scrolls,
think it
and
makes
data
sense. You don't
crystals
want a
are
secret to be
stacked from
revealed.
floor to ceiling and meticulously organized by the lower-ranking librarians. Due to their secretive nature, the members of the Administratum can only make educated guesses on the content stored within a librarium. Thus, the histories of many chapters continue to go undocumented by the larger Imperium. Also deep within a librarium is another even more well-guarded chamber, where all of the secret objects, relics, artifacts, and trophies deemed too dangerous for the eyes of any but the chief librarian are stored. These can take the form of demonic and/or Xenos weaponry, profane texts, legendary artifacts, or any number of other dangerous relics. The knowledge that such items are contained here, but they're given a lack of insight into their nature, is something that has caused a great deal of friction between the Space Marine chapters and...
I was thinking, like, how do they even get these items in if it's too, like, dangerous to, like, hold unless you're a chief librarian? Maybe the chiefs, like, showed up and grabbed it and put it back into the librarian area. But what do you mention? What do you say about this? There's
relics.
friction?
The knowledge that such items are contained here, but they're given a lack of insight into their nature, is something that has caused a great
okay.
deal of friction
Gotcha.
between the Space Marine chapters and the Ecclesiarchy. The Librarius is also the place where the vast armory of force weapons and other esoteric equipment utilized by the Librarians is stored. Force weapons can come in a wide array of different forms, such as blades, staffs, and axes, to name but a few. They are each psychically attuned to a specific librarian, and are thus rendered useless in the hands of just about anyone else. The
Makes
force
sense,
weapon
makes sense,
allows them
yeah.
to funnel the entirety of their psychic might into a focused
still
point
I'm the mercy of
directly
angels.
into their enemy. They do this through a device built into the weapon called a psi convector. It normally takes the form of a serpentine pattern across the surface of the weapon that concentrates and directs the librarian's psychic energy. Becoming attuned to such a weapon is an incredibly difficult task, even for the most skilled of librarians, and can
Interesting.
take months or years of dedicated practice. The difficulty is compounded even further if this is not a new blade, and instead is one being passed on to a new wielder. The effects are well worth the dedication, however, as a librarian with a force weapon can strike down even the most dangerous and well-armored targets in a single strike.
Oh,
The psychic
okay,
hoods
that
they wear,
sounds-
on
that
the
sounds
other hand,
broken.
are a strange
I love it.
arcane device that serve a few different purposes. Not only are they able to greatly boost and assist in the proper channeling of a librarian's power, but more importantly, they have a nullifying effect on enemy Psykers within range, interrupting their connection to the warp and making it more difficult for them to channel their abilities. Much like how every chapter has its own unique history and set of traditions, librarians can take on different forms and roles within their respective chapter as well. For example, the role of a librarian is filled by the Rune Priests within the Space Wolves. They believe the powers they wield derive from their homeworld of Fenris, or rather from the Sea of Souls. And in a lot of regards, they don't actually consider themselves to be Psykers. Additionally, when it comes to their librarium itself, they don't tend to value written records like other librarians do.
Oh, wait, so each chapter, or each Space Marine faction chapter, whatever, they have their own librarian? I thought it was like one main librarian that they all, like, shared. I didn't know it was, like, separate. Let me make sure I heard that right.
In a lot of regards, they don't actually consider themselves to be Psykers. Additionally, when it comes to their librarium itself, they don't tend to
And to their
value
librarium.
written records
Oh, wow.
like other
Okay.
librarians do. Instead, relying on the ancient tradition of oral storytelling.
Or maybe it is one shared librarian, it's just they don't, like, write stuff down and put it in there. I don't know. We'll figure it out later. But storytelling, got
A
it.
rune priest who is early in their training is known as a Skald, and part of the Skald's training is to journey to each and every great company and spend one great year with them. They will spend that time amongst the brothers of the company, hearing and memorizing every single one of their great sagas.
Okay.
At the conclusion of the Great Year, they will journey to another great company and repeat the process. Eventually, the Rune Priest will have
Better
an
have a
encyclopedic
notepad or
knowledge
something.
of all of the lore of the Space Wolves. And through their words, will they teach the wisdom of their ancestors to all of the new recruits and their battle brothers.
That's crazy.
Likewise, these
That's
Storm
crazy. I'm
Seers
gonna
of the
write that
White
down.
Scars
That's
take
too
on
much.
a more shamanistic role within their chapter. Like
White
the Rune
Scars.
Priests, they believe their powers come from their homeworld of Chigoris rather than the Warp, and thus practice psychic disciplines that emphasize the manipulation of the elements. In both accounts, the calling upon powers from their homeworld rather than the Immaterium is believed to offer them a considerable level of additional protection from the malign entities within the Warp.
I can
The
see
Storm
that.
Seers
I
are
respect that.
revered members of the White Scars, who emulate the holy men that rode the plains with their Primarch Jagatai Khan before the Great Crusade. These men are called upon every 10 summers to witness the tribal warriors of Chigoris that would seek to become White Scars. It is they who choose the most worthy to become brand new Space Marines. Additionally, whenever one of the White Scars leaders that are known as Khans are killed, it is the Storm Seers that elect who will replace them. Although the reality of being a librarian can differ from chapter to chapter, for the most part, it's a pretty lonely life. It is one in which you will always stand apart from your brothers, always kept at arm's reach. Your skills and knowledge are without question respected and appreciated, but there's always that fine line that separates you. You are a witch. You are a walking nuclear reactor, one that at any moment could go critical. Every time you open yourself to the world, you do so as well to corruption and temptation. You know this, and your brothers know this. Thus, you are always viewed with suspicion and mistrust, even if it's only simmering beneath the surface and not readily apparent to mortal eyes.
That's crazy. We all went through these trials together. Well, different trials together. We still brothers, even though I might go crazy one day. But I trained for this. I shouldn't go crazy. But it's probably instances of librarian going crazy, like they tapping too much into the warp, or maybe it is they just they slipped up. Probably instances of this, which is probably why other Space Marines feel like, all right, go away from me. I don't know you like that. Back up, back up, my boy.
The way librarians are viewed by their non-psychic brothers is a duality that is equal parts interesting and admittedly sad. It's not that they're not respected, far from it. They are the keepers of the chapter's history, and they have been blessed with remarkable talents in which the chapter can utilize. But to be a librarian is to be both simultaneously respected and feared, admired and mistrusted. However, that mistrust goes both ways in a sense, as one of the responsibilities of a librarian is to forever be vigilant of weakness within the chapter. They are constantly scouring the minds of all of their brothers, carefully recording any instance of deviancy, no matter how minor. They take no pleasure in submitting them to such scrutiny.
Don't mess up, I swear to God,
that's what a chapter can make no compromise on. Purity of mind ranks amongst their highest ideals. Any of their brothers that have at any point suffered intense psychic trauma, whether Xenos or chaotic in nature, will be regularly and meticulously screened by the librarians. The cleansing of their mind and soul done not just to protect the individual, but more importantly, the gene seed within them. They work closely and tirelessly with their chapter's apothecaries to make sure corruption will never be allowed to take root within their chapter, and weakness will be eradicated wherever it is found.
Oh, eradicated, okay. No, alright. I think if you do get corrupted, you might be done so. You might just be eliminated. I don't know. It sounds like you might be eliminated. And we're back again.
The history of the librarians is incredibly interesting, but admittedly, frustratingly vague. At least when it comes to their origins. We know that the very first instance of Psykers being utilized by the Space Marines was during the Unification Wars on Terra. They were known as the Host of Pinnacles and fought alongside the Dark Angels, as they were the first Space Marine Legion to be created. Although these war witches were said to be incredibly effective, they were not trusted by the Space Marines, and eventually the order would be disbanded by Grandmaster Hector Thane after the sealing of the Black Gate. Sometime later, during the Great Crusade, the three Primarchs, Magnus the Red, Sanguinius, and Jagatai Khan, would make an impassioned plea to the Emperor to utilize Psykers once more. They proposed the Librarian program, which would allow the psychically gifted men of the Thousand Sons to train and create a Librarius department in many of the different legions. Over time, this program would prove to be pretty popular amongst the legions, and just about all of them would end up having a Librarius of their own. It was only the Iron Warriors, the Space Wolves, the Imperial Fists, the Iron Hands, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's Children who chose not to participate in the program, all for different reasons.
Okay, so the Black Knights participated, or were they here at this time?
the Space Wolves, the Imperial Fists, the Iron Hands, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's Children, who chose not to participate in the program, all for different reasons. Mortarion of the Death Guard, for example, abhorred witches in all their forms, due to his upbringing on the toxic world of Barbarous that had been ruled over by necromantic and vaguely human abominations known as the Overlords. Regardless of their usefulness, mistrust of Psykers would come to a head during the Council of Nicaea, wherein the factions that were opposed to Psykers and viewed them as nothing more than witches that would ultimately bring about the downfall of mankind, wanted the Librarians program disbanded. There were impassioned arguments on both sides, namely on the pro side, Magnus the Red and the White Scars that had come to represent Jagatai Khan, and Mortarion leading the side that was opposed to them. After it was all said and done, the Emperor decreed that the use of psychic powers would be banned from the legions, and thus dismantled the Librarian program.
That's crazy,
the Librarians
Emperor.
would be folded back into the ranks as standard battle brothers. Now, to ensure the spiritual well-being of the legions, Malkador the Sigillite issued the Order of Observance, and made the legions utilize what were known as chaplains, a unit famously used by the Wordbearers at the time. Now, unlike the Wordbearers chaplains who preached the Emperor's divinity, these chaplains would instead focus on the chapter's history and values, instilling into their brothers the wisdom of the Space Marines that had come before. However, this was not the only purpose of the chaplains, as Malkador believed that many of the legions would not hold to the judgment rendered at Nicaea, and thus the chaplains would serve the additional purpose of making sure the edict was upheld and enforced. During the Horus Heresy, it was made apparent that many of these anti-Psykers at the Council of Nicaea had been operating in bad faith, as during the battle of the Ultramarines-held world of Calth, when the Wordbearers revealed their treachery, they would unleash the untold horrors of the Warp, summoning entire hosts of demons to wreak untold havoc and slaughter the planet's population. Having never really fought against these creatures before, the Ultramarines were shocked to find that their physical weaponry did very little to damage
I bet you wish you had these Librarians now, huh?
of the Warp. Their Primarch Gilliman realized that in order to fight this new threat, that they would need to fight fire with fire. The psychic disciplines of the Librarians were the greatest weapon they had against the demonic invaders, a fact that the traitors at Nicaea had definitely been aware of. The Librarians would rise once more, and would ultimately play a major role in the defeat of Horus's rebellion at the Siege of Terra. Now, I'll fully admit here that in my research, I have yet to find any evidence that the Council of Nicaea was ever openly overturned. And if you know of a source on this, I would love to read about it, so let me know down in the comments below. As far as it stands in the 42nd millennium, the decision of whether or not to utilize Librarians seems to be left up to each individual chapter. To me, the Librarians are possibly one of the most interesting aspects of all of the Loyalist Space Marines.
I can see it.
On one hand, they are vastly more powerful than any of their peers, equally as skilled with bolter and blade, yet able to bend reality to their whim. Yet they fight an unseen battle every minute of every day for their very souls, constantly subjecting themselves to all manner of torturous ritual and arcane warfare to hold back the demons that wish to invade their minds. As their powers continue to grow, and their aura glows brighter within the Warp, they become ever more of a desired prize for the malignant entities that dwell just beyond the veil of our reality.
Hey, it's waiting to take their bodies or something.
If at any moment they lacked certainty in their purpose, if for just a second they stepped off of the path set before them by the Librarians, the resulting consequences would be disastrous. Thus, they must always remain vigilant. They must be constantly working to maintain their resolve and heighten their already inhuman levels of discipline,
keep your guard up at all times
from anything that would distract them from their ultimate purpose. For as they say within the Librarians, an open mind is like a fortress, with its gates unbarred and unguarded.
Librarians, they are one of the strongest. No, they are the strongest Psykers in the Space Marines. But again, if they mess up for even a split second, it's over. They're gonna get got by the forces of evil, the entity, the chaos. They're gonna be gotten by them, and we can't let that happen. First on, it's gonna mess up the GNC. Second off, it's gonna have crazy amount of damage that could happen. Nah, we need Librarians. Okay, I understand why they are now they're more ruthless when it comes to selecting who's a Librarian and training them, because y'all guys are really important into fighting evil. Really, really important. Let me give that like real quick. He's at 666K subscribers. Someone subscribe right now. We need him to get at least a 667, because that's a crazy number to be at right now. That's a crazy number. But kind of fitting for the Warhammer vibe. Space Marines Librarians. They got probably one of the most difficult jobs in the Space Marine universe, but hey, the Black Tip. No, it was the Black Knights, right? The Black Knights. I think he mentioned that they do not mess with librarians. They don't want no librarian like section chapter for them. They need to change their game. I guess not. I don't know. Maybe they're doing good, but to consider that heresy, I'm like, hey, buddy, we trying to win. We trying to beat against these forces of evil. Take anything that you can get, cause y'all are losing this battle, this war. I did not know they were that crazy. I thought it was the Inquisitors. Was it Inquisitors? Like the people that can like basically nuke a whole planet if they deem it necessary. I thought they were the strongest, like Psykers. Nah, Librarians. They're cracked. They're broken. They're insane. I love it. I love it. So it really depends on their imagination and their skill level. They can do whatever they want, basically, with magic. But again, every time they use magic, there's a chance they might get corrupted from the warp, because some of the Librarians use their powers from the warp. And some use their powers from their home world, like the White Scars and what was the other one? The basically the wolves, the Vikings. Was it the White Scars? No, it was the sharks. It was the shark librarians. Deep sea fighting style, fighting magic. Yeah, I did not know they were that insane coming into this because I thought they just dealt with a librarian, you know, reading stuff, writing records down to make sure they don't forget things. I did not know they were that crazy in the actual battlefield. They could change everything if they're on the field. Alright, but that's gonna do it for this video. We definitely have to check out some more Warhammer videos, especially some lore videos, because some of these factions, these groups, they got some crazy history and powers that I'm all here for. I'm all here for. Alright, but that's gonna do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed my reaction, and thank you for watching. My cup of tea is out of here. Deuces, y'all. I think the Emperor definitely folded when he like disbanded the whole Librarian plan during the before the House of Horus, that event. Maybe it was all part of his plan though, because again, the Emperor, everything is all according to his plan, which will pay off thousands and thousands of years later. Maybe it was all for a good reason why he disbanded that and they suffered so much losses during that. I don't know. I cannot challenge the Emperor. We just gotta go with whatever the Emperor says. We just gotta go with it. Even though it was a really big fumble, we're gonna go with it.